everybody.
Hello.
It's so lovely to see your faces, even with the mask. Maybe even especially with the mask. Let's be honest. It's nice to be in a room with people who are willing to wear the mask for an event like this. It makes me feel really honored and really special. I want to say thank you, not just for being here, but also for being interested in the book, for reading the book. It means the world to me to be able to share my life, my story, with so many people in a respectful and encouraging way. Also, thank you so much for letting me be here at the Greenwood Cultural Center. My lovely Lyft driver took me on a little tour of the. I'm not kidding. I mean, he was both lovely and he took me on a tour. And showed me so much about this part of the city, things that honestly I didn't know that I'd ever get to see it with my own eyes. And being here is incredibly powerful and humbling, so thank you for having me. It means, God, so much to me. Thank you. I'm gonna read the 7th chapter in my book. This is the chapter that I think sort of establishes some of the emotions behind my relationship with my primary parent, my mother, as well as my secondary parent, her mother, and some time that I spent away from my mom in Missouri while my mom was healing. This chapter is essentially the best introduction, I think, to the book for people who haven't read it that I could read. So I hope you like it. If not, you already got the book, so you can't get it. My mother wanted to be with her boyfriend. He wanted to be with her too. But there was distance and youth, and there always seemed to be some other woman involved. It would not last between them. He'd come into her life quickly, and he left the same way. The culmination of the first phase of that relationship, the baby, my second brother, was born without ever breathing. My grandmother said he was born small and gray, with an exposed serpentine spine. When she repeated this story, she would push up her glasses, wrinkle her nose, and use her index finger to make a wavy line in the air to illustrate the curve of his body. She said my mother held him for hours, kissed the top of his head, rocked him against her chest. My mother hadn't wanted to have another baby, not without being married, but abortion wasn't an option, and he kept growing inside her. My mother could not fathom what kind of good Christian woman would end the life of a child, even if she was in no position to provide for him, and my mother very much wanted to be a good Christian woman. Still, she did not want to be pregnant, and when the baby was born, already dead, she blamed her desire to be free for his passing. She named him after his father. She did not mark his grave. My mother came home to us raw and all alone. My grandmother told me she sat in the bathtub for hours, bleeding into the water. She stared into the space between herself and the walls, her body purging its sin, staining the off-white fiberglass. Her silence worried my brother and me for reasons we couldn't grasp just yet. He and I would sit close enough to hear the water make small splashes when she adjusted herself, making sure she wasn't giving up on her breathing or living, that she wasn't giving up on us. On the other side of the door, my mother sent noiseless prayers into her bathwater, repenting in spontaneous expulsions, oblivious to the world growing red around her. Grandma and my mother's sisters wanted her to be well. They took her back to see the man who had delivered baby Daryl and the hole in his back. They told him my mother's symptoms because she'd lost her voice somewhere down in her chest, somewhere they couldn't reach in and grab it. She'd stopped trying to find her voice days before. She was content in her silence, in her bleeding, and in her inevitable demise. The doctor told my grandmother it was psychosomatic. My grandmother called him a quack and a demon. He said, "There's no reason for her to be bleeding anymore. She's using her mind to punish herself. She won't get better until she chooses to get better." Someone decided my brother would stay with my mother and I would leave with my grandmother. We moved to her father's, my great-grandfather's farmhouse in Columbia, Missouri. A few years later, when I couldn't quite remember the worst of this time, I'd ask why I was sent off with Grandma Billy before kindergarten. I would be told, "Because you said you wanted to go." I disappeared into a new life in Missouri, a life without either brother, living or dead, and a grandmother who put strawberries and whipped cream on my waffles without blood under her nails. There was no one for me to protect or worry over. I missed my mother, but less and less every day. To keep me company, I had a dog, a goat, and a great-grandfather who threw hammers at wild pigs in the backyard, then paid me $2 to collect the tools and bring them back in the house. It was a game I thought my brother might enjoy, but I tried not to think of my brother too much. When I did, I felt sick with missing him. I couldn't forget him if I tried. My grandmother and I had our own routine. I had school and daycare all week, and I got to see a movie and get one toy on Saturdays. We alternated picking the movies, and when it was my turn, I could pick whichever movie I wanted all by myself. I was electrified by the power of my choice and made my decisions based almost exclusively on the posters outside the theater. That's how I ended up picking films like Lorenzo's Oil, Passion Fish, and Groundhog Day. I was easy to please and never protested my grandmother's picks, even after Fire in the Sky made me cry myself to sleep for a week. I'm gonna pause for a second to say, I don't know if you guys know what the movie Fire in the Sky is. It's about a man who gets abducted and tortured by extraterrestrials. And I was about 5 years old. This woman was wild in terms of what she thought was appropriate for me to see at the movies. I understand why they have ratings now. My grandma took me to see What's Love Got to Do with It in the theaters. So just keep that in mind. My grandmother was loving, but being comforting wasn't her gift. Each night she taught me to read, alternating between the Holy Bible, Barbie comics, and supermarket celebrity tabloids. I thought Princess Diana and Mary Magdalene would have looked similar. I thought the same about Billy Ray Cyrus and Jesus. When the thought of alien abduction kept me up, the Star magazine I kept under my pillow reminded me to stop holding my breath. Living with my grandmother and her father in the fields of Missouri, I learned to think only of myself for hours at a time. Spending half a day alone, free of the company of people who would distract me from my being, I learned to think about who I was becoming, and what I wanted. I spent my free time exploring my great-grandfather's land, roaming farther than I was allowed. Too young and dumb to be scared of them, I made a game of sneaking up on and catching garden snakes by the tail. I caught them fast enough to shock them, and then dropped them before they caught my skin between their fangs. I was only bitten once. It was fast and painful, but I did not scream. My eyes got wide, and my arms flailed around until it let go. After the garden snake released me, I closed my eyes and leaned against a tree. I steadied my breath and soothed myself by speaking directly into the 2 puncture wounds in my first finger. It don't hurt, Ashley. I cradled the stinging hand with its opposite. If it hurt, you die. You won't die. On our Christmas visit to Indiana, my mother accused my grandmother of turning me against her. She acts like she doesn't even know who I am. My mother's tongue was coated in venom, her familiar anger rising in the back of her throat. A few days before Christmas, my mother came into the living room and saw me playing with a doll. It was the same doll she bought and wrapped for me under the tree. It was a doll she knew I'd love, something she hoped would remind me of the games we used to play and the life we'd had together back when we lived in the studio apartment. Now she was renting a 2-bedroom house with enough room for me to return, but I was still in Missouri. No one thought it would be a good idea for me to move back to Fort Wayne in the middle of a school year, but my mother missed me and wanted me home. She screamed at me for opening the present, a gift she had to work overtime to purchase. I did not only feel distant from my mother, I felt angry with her and unsure of what she wanted with me. She sent me away, called me back, and now she seemed mad that I was here. I started to walk away from her and found myself buried face first in her living room carpet. My mother kicked me. I didn't cry. After a few moments, my mother picked me up and held me against her. Being held was rare and precious, an offering in and of itself. I rejected it, making my body go limp. I hoped she thought I was dead or paralyzed. I wanted her to think she really hurt me. I wanted her to apologize like her old boyfriend did. My grandmother walked into the room, took a look at us, and asked what happened. My mother told her I'd opened my gift. My grandmother explained that she bought me the same doll in Missouri. My grandmother knelt beside me. "Are you okay, baby?" I looked toward the front door. "I'm fine. It don't hurt. I'm not dead." My mother walked into her bedroom and shut the door. "Grandma, tell her it's okay. I'm not dead. I'm alive." When my grandmother and I returned to the farmhouse, I jumped out of my grandfather's car and ran into the house. I ran into the sitting room where my tea set was always on the back table, then into the bathroom where my good toothbrush was still in the pink cup behind the sink. I touched all the things that reminded me of my new life in Missouri, where no one hit me. I could read as much as I wanted, and there was no rusty red stains left in rings around the bathtub. I spoke to my grandmother without looking at her. "Don't ever make me leave again, okay? I don't want to leave again." She looked down at me, then into the backyard, into the places I played without permission. She grabbed my hand and walked me out toward the trees, grabbing a shovel and a burlap bag next to the grill on the way. We walked farther and farther back until we were in the part of our land where my great-grandfather let the grasses grow long. My grandmother stomped around a bit, then staked the shovel's blade into the dirt. She dug slowly and with purpose, like she was sneaking up on the earth spread out before us. The ground was soft, so it wasn't long before she told me to come closer. I leaned over the hole and saw a garden snake. No, 2, 3, 4, a lot of garden snakes. They were in some sort of a knot, though not stuck together. They moved quickly and deliberately over and around one another. They were not fighting, and they did not seem to be trying to get away from us or anything else. "What are they doing, Grandma?" My grandmother stared into the hole. "They're loving each other, baby." She reached into the bag, poured lighter fluid into the hole, then a lit match. The grass in and around the hole burned, and then so did the snakes. My first instinct was to reach in and throw them as far as I could, to safety, but I hesitated when I remembered their bite. I waited too long to do them any good. The snakes did not slither away or thrash around as they burned. They held each other tighter. Even as the scales melted from their bodies, their inclination was to squeeze closer to the other snakes wrapped around them. Their green lengths blackened and bubbled, causing the flesh that simmered underneath each individual metallic hood to ooze. They did not panic. They did not run. I started to cry. You will have to go back. We'll both go back home. Your mama misses you. My grandmother reached over and grabbed my hand, both of us still staring into the hole. These things catch fire without letting each other go. We don't give up on our people. We don't stop loving them. She looked into my face, her eyes watering at the bottoms. Not even when we're burning alive. Thank you. This one's mine.
I just gotta say, wow. That was a powerful reading. Thank you for sharing that. I don't even know where to begin, Ashley.
Begin wherever you want, Kuma.
I'm really excited to be with you today. And part of that excitement comes from the fact that I read your incredibly powerful and very beautifully written memoir, as we're witness to. It was written so personally. It feels as though I know you. And so how has it been since the book came out, connecting with so many people on such a deep level, that you've shared such intimate aspects of your life? How has that been? I mean, how are people reacting to you? How are you reacting to people that are, engaging with you in that intimate way, right?
So far, all of the reactions have been really positive and really kind and really empowering, so that helps. But I did a lot of work before the book came out, making sure that I knew who I was, and I knew what my boundaries were, and I knew how to ask for help, and I knew how to take care of myself if I needed it. Because I knew that the book it's a lot, it's big, it's a lot of me offered up as a story to share with other people. But one of the things that was really important to me when I was thinking about putting this book out and thinking about how much of myself I wanted to share with people was remembering that I'm not ashamed of my life. I'm not ashamed of my life. I'm not ashamed of any part of my life. I'm not ashamed to be me. I am proud of my life. Everything that I've gone through has not been great. I mean, if you read the book, you know that. But I'm pretty great, and I'm pretty happy. And I think that especially for Black folks and Black women, and especially Black women in the Midwest, I think it's important that we have more of our stories living in the world in a way that people can read them and get a peek into what life is like for us, and also so that, like, when another young Black woman finds a book like this, that she knows that she's not alone, that she knows that these things, these questions she has, these challenges she has in a lot of cases have come before her. People have thought about them, people have experienced them, and we're not going to have all the answers about how to fix them, but there is a lot of power in just knowing that you're not alone. And when I was growing up, I wished I had a book that talked about some of the things I talk about in this book, especially being the child of an incarcerated person, because I couldn't find books that talked about those experiences, and definitely not ones that spoke to those experiences in a way that was nonfiction and not a story that came from someone's imagination. And with as many people as we incarcerate in this country, we have to know that they have daughters and sons and children and parents and brothers and sisters and people who are affected by their incarceration. And we should hear those stories.
Incredible. I mean, I think about the journey that you've been on, right? The journey in knowing who you are. I mean, I'm 46. I feel like I'm
Still popping.
still trying to figure that part out. And so I'm kind of in awe of someone who is given intentional time, right, to knowing who they are. I've always been someone who wished I could write. I used to do a little dabbling in high school, you understand. And I had some encouragement from some professors and teachers who encouraged me to write. But what compels one to write a book? And does it just sort of bubble up and sort of burst out of you, and you just like can't handle it and you just write it, or does it simmer and kind of bubble on the stove and it kind of ekes its way out? I just would love to know that process for you.
I think every writer is going to have a different process, and I think there are a lot of different ways that a book can come out. I also think that every book comes out differently. Mm-hmm. I don't know very many people who have written multiple books who wrote every book the same way, with the same process or anything. Like, some people are like, this one just poured out, this one I ripped out, and you never, and it's hard to tell which is which. It's just different books have different processes. I will tell you that I have ADHD. And I am also not a person who was raised with a great idea of how to set or maintain a routine. Nobody around me really had real routines. So in order for me to write this book, I had to figure out how to let myself have those moments when I was feeling really emotional and feeling like that it just has to get out, how to allow myself to have that and write it down, but also how to have some kind of a routine and maintain a writing practice. I am not a person who writes every day. I never will be a person who writes every day. That's just not the way my brain works. But I am a person who tries to write whenever I can. So when I feel something coming up or whatever, and I can make room for it, then I choose to make room for it. I choose myself. And that's a privilege. Yeah. One of the things that I tell people a lot when it comes to, when they're like, how did you write this book? How did all this stuff happen? First of all, my publisher gave me a lot of money to write this book. And I want to say that up front, because they did. They gave me a lot of money to write this book, which meant that the entire time that I was writing this book, after I sold it, I didn't have to have a different job. I didn't have to have another job. The book became my job, which means taking care of the writer of the book became my job. And so there are some people who can do it differently. Some people go work 9 to 5s and they come home and they write that book 30 minutes at a time at their kitchen table. And that's what they had, and they use what they had. But I don't want to pretend that, I was scrapping away in a corner and stealing bits of time. I was incredibly privileged on the latter half of working on this book with the abundance of time that I was able to offer myself because my publisher adequately invested in me so that I could adequately invest in myself, and specifically in my mental and emotional health.
And that's amazing. There were so many elements of your story that really resonated with me. Obviously, I'm a Black woman, so that had something there. But what really resonated me in particular was the complexities of the relationship that you had with your mother, right? I had my own challenges with my own mother. Expressing love to my mother was hard, her expressing it back to me. I had failure issues, things about failing her, right? Failing myself. Self-esteem, and I also had an actual fear of my mother. And so I had mommy issues. Much of who I am is wrapped up in being Cynthia's daughter. So how did you land on the title of Somebody's Daughter? It's like I wanted there to be a name. I wanted it. Are you your mother's daughter? Are you your father's daughter? I just how did that title come about, and why Somebody's Daughter?
Well, first of all, the name came to me. It was the name that I put on the proposal. This is the only thing I've ever titled where they actually kept the title in my entire life. I'm a notoriously bad titler. I don't know why. It's just usually not my thing. My book is the only thing that I've ever come up with the title with, and there was no pushback. The publisher loved the title, and they wanted to keep it from the beginning. For me, it came from the fact that while this book is about me and my parental relationships, I think if when you read the book closely, you realize that I am being parented throughout the whole book by a lot of different people in different moments. And that was something that was so, when I was a child, I was so aware that it was a little odd how many adults tended to look at me and go, I'm gonna help this kid, or I'm gonna say the right thing to this kid, or I'm gonna show up in a real way for this kid. And I always felt like that was something that I had in abundance, while a lot of other kids had it in no capacity. Like, even if they didn't have somebody to go home to who listened to them and helped them, so they also didn't have it at school. They also didn't have it in community. Those kids were, maybe a little quieter than I was. Less, in some cases, those kids were maybe just a little, like, a little less, like I was not super talkative as a kid, but I was not afraid to talk to adults at all. I think because of how I felt about my family, I knew that adults technically had authority over me, but I didn't really feel like they knew a whole lot more than what I did. So I didn't have that fear thing that a lot of kids have with adults, or that hesitancy. I would be like, no, I think that's wrong. And weirdly, some adults really like that, and then they want to engage with you and they want to encourage you, and that happened for me. And so many of those people parented me at different times in my life. The guy who officiated my wedding, I call my college dad, because when I went to Ball State, there was this guy who I actually was babysitting for him and his wife, and it turned into me not being the babysitter and basically being like their ward for a little while, because I had nowhere else to go. And, and those are, in a way, my parents. Yeah. So when I was writing this book and including all these people and including all these moments that were so important to me, one of the things that I really wanted to drive home was that the job of parenting kids is obviously legally only their parents' job, but it's kind of everybody's job. And we fall down on the job a lot. But this is what happens when people show up consistently for somebody who they have no obligation to, just because it's the right thing to do.
Oh my gosh. So that being said, I love this. You've been parented by different people at different times in your life. Every sort of synopsis, ever I tried to read, first of all, I didn't want to ask a whole bunch of questions that you'd already been asked before. So I wanted to be unique, and I hope I'm stumping you a little bit tonight. But secondarily, all of the synopsis, all the things I read was Ashley C. Ford's book, Somebody's Daughter, where she grew up with an incarcerated father, complicated relationship with a mother, and poor. And I thought, okay, so there were so many experiences that you shared, even just in your reading, about a tea set and a doll that your mother and grandmother both duplicated, and a college experience where you go and are put in a dorm and all of this. So, did you know you were poor?
No. No, I really didn't. Okay. Until I didn't know that, I knew that we had issues with money.
Sure.
Right? I knew that I had spent, I've only recently realized that I spent most of my life trying to want less, and trying to kind of want as little as possible, and not letting myself want things, because I had in my mind that wanting things hurt my mother. Wow. That if I wanted something that she could not give me, if I desired something that she couldn't give me, that it hurt her. Yeah. And my mom wasn't huge on compliments, but one of the compliments that she gave my brother and I a lot was, Ashley and RC, they never asked for all that expensive stuff. They never. These two young ones, they want Jordans, they want Gucci, they want everything else. But Ashley and RC never asked for any of that stuff. They never liked those things. And I was thinking about that because I was like, did I not like them? Or did I just realize from a very early age that we couldn't afford them? And so I made myself say, well, it's not important. Well, it's not a big deal. You know, mom can't afford that. And, you know, growing up in Indiana, low cost of living, I mean, my mom was a single parent with 4 kids, but my mom was never financially stable, even as a person who owned a home.
Right.
You know, she was never financially stable. And we were aware of that. It was just that we lived in a community, and I went to a school where that was normal. What we were dealing with was incredibly normal. 75% of my school system was on free and reduced lunch. 75%. So we were like, yeah, this is what it is. Like, there wasn't really anything different. And I didn't realize how poor we were, to be perfectly honest, until I went to college. And I remember being there that first week and showing up with my mini fridge that my mom's boyfriend had salvaged out of a garbage, and my bedding that I'd had to use almost all of my graduation. Like, we had a graduation party, you know, people give you like money for graduation. All of that money for me went for just like shampoo and toothpaste and bedding and stuff like that for school. When people's parents would show up and be like, oh, you don't have this thing you need, let's run to Target and get it. I was like, what? Your parents are just gonna like take you there right now to get something? Or people who would be like, oh, well, I'm gonna text my dad, see if he'll put some money in my account. Excuse me? What? I didn't know that was real. I thought that was TV. I thought that was like shows like Gossip Girl. I didn't know that parents did those kinds of things financially. You know, I don't have a lot of school memories. I don't have yearbooks. We couldn't afford them. I don't have senior pictures. I have my letters, but I couldn't get a Letterman jacket. You know, things that other people think was very regular, very normal, were very special at my school. And I didn't know that they weren't that special until I got to college and realized, I'm like, oh, people have a little more than I thought they did.
Wow, that's so funny. I wondered, I don't think I knew that I was poor, like acutely at the time, but I look back and
my house
probably was.
You know, our house was my mom took really good care of our house and our yard, and we were all expected to contribute in that way. And so it never occurred to me. I knew that we weren't rich, but I didn't think we were as poor as we were. But then, you know, you fill out that FAFSA. And
girl, it becomes real clear. You broke. Let me ask you this question. I've been given the signal. We want to make sure we open it up for some questions. This is going to be my last question. I have so many. I'm going to try to figure this out. There are some incredibly sobering and difficult moments that you share in the book. You're talking about being molested. You're talking about rape by a boyfriend. Yet, somehow, you've written a book where those incidents don't hover. It's not a book about rape. And it doesn't feel like that's the sum total of defining who you are. And so help me understand how you walked that fine line.
I knew when I was going to write this book that I wanted to include that scene and that information, but I also knew that I didn't want to re-traumatize myself or traumatize anybody else. So I wanted to focus on the parts of that situation that were wrapped up in my family dynamic and in my feelings about myself. So I focused on the dissociation and the continued disassociation from that trauma. I focused on the temperature of that time. I focused on essentially the things that I ended up having to work through in adulthood. like my extreme aversion to the cold, and my need to sometimes just sort of like go away when things get a little too hard. So I knew that I could, or I wanted to try to write it in a way that conveyed that emotion and conveyed the impression of that experience without leaving it on top of the reader. I'm glad that I got it right. Hopefully.
Got it right.
But I didn't know that I got it right until it was out in the world and the readers started to respond. Also, part of the reason I think why I didn't want it to hover is because I grew up with a lot of that sort of like Lifetime movie scenario of like a woman, typically a woman being assaulted and then forever being like plagued by like these flashbacks, and she can't be in a romantic relationship because like anybody getting close to her just freaks her out and all of that stuff. And I thought I was so terrified that that was going to be my experience, and that I like almost was like prepared for that to be my experience. And I was shocked when it wasn't, because I didn't know that a victim or a survivor of sexual assault can react to that in a myriad of different ways. And it doesn't all look the same. I know that I had not dealt with the emotional impact of being assaulted or molested for many, many, many years. But intellectually, I was really lucky that I felt very clear that what had happened to me had nothing to do with sex. It was sexual assault, but that was not sex. And knowing that that was not sex, in a way, helped me separate that act from what my body desired with someone who loved and cared for me. And I had never seen that written out before. I had never seen that written about before. Usually when a person writes about sexual assault or they portray it in a book, it's like that's the defining thing that happened to you in your life. You're that girl now. You're that guy now. You're that person now. Whatever it is, right? And that wasn't true for me. And I struggled for a long time with feeling like the wrong kind of victim or the wrong kind of survivor because what had happened in those films and in those narratives didn't play out for me. So I wanted to give people at least one thing that was different, and that showed that there was a different reaction that could happen, and it didn't mean you're the wrong kind. It didn't mean that what happened to you is not fallen under this umbrella or under this definition. It just means that this is what it looks like for you.
Wow. Well, that being said, I'm sure there are other people that want to talk to you and ask you a question.
Maybe.
So, anyone have any questions for Ashley? I could go on all night. Yes.
Hi. So, first let me say that this book was everything that I didn't know that I needed. It's helping me transition through just, things that I've, dealt with in my childhood, now as an adult. And so I'm curious as to, while you were writing this book, what were some of your self-care, routines or some of your self-care practices as you were writing, this, because of course everything about this story, isn't real.
Yeah.
So.
So I never missed a therapy session, okay? I had that appointment on lock. Peter, where you at? It's time. Absolutely. So I never missed a therapy session. I did a lot of, one of the things that I've struggled with traditionally is feeling my feelings in my body, allowing myself to feel them in my body and not trying to either intellectualize them or force them away in some way. And when I would get to a part of the book that was really hard to write or was really hard to remember, I let myself have as many breaks as I wanted. I let myself have a glass of wine if I wanted, let myself enjoy some other things if I wanted, just because I knew that what I needed in that moment was comfort, real comfort, the kind that like feels good to me, the kind that I want, the kind that is tried and true. I also learned how to ask for help, I guess. That's probably the biggest one. The biggest one is that outside of, my therapist, outside of my husband, I learned how to reach out to friends and people who love and care for me and say, hey, working on a hard part of the book, and I'm feeling kind of devastated right now in a way that I don't seem to be able to bring myself out of. Could you just talk to me for a bit? Like, do you have a minute? It's okay if you don't, and everybody has a minute. Like, they got a minute. And I would talk to a friend for 5 minutes about whatever in the world just to help me hit reset, just to help me get back into my body and not float off, because things were getting kind of painful or too hard. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Sometimes it was just like me at my desk, my husband at the other end of the desk, literally just sitting there reading his book and being next to me while I wrote so that I didn't have to go through it alone.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Who was somebody that read your book that you hardcore fangirled over and like it felt really surreal? Oprah.
Oprah read the proposal. She just asked who read my book that I freaked out and fangirled over. Oprah read the proposal and bought the book. So the whole time I was writing it, let's just be clear about the fact that I was also really trying not to embarrass Oprah. Okay? I was trying to not embarrass this lovely woman. I think I'm trying to Gabrielle Union, probably. Gabby reached out to my publisher for an early copy and got an early copy, and she put it on her Instagram and she had it on TikTok, and she was just really incredibly kind about it and apparently really liked it, and that was amazing. That was really cool, because that's ISIS, okay? That is ISIS. It was a very, very happy moment for me. So I would say that's number one. Number two is my brother. Yeah, I did. My brother RC. I didn't expect my siblings to read it, I'm gonna be honest. Typically, my siblings are kind of like, hey, good job, we heard you do things. We're gonna go do something else. But all three of them read my book within days of it coming out, which I didn't expect. And my brother sent me the kindest message, just saying oh my God, I see you. Oh my God, I see you. And it just, sorry. See, now I'm getting, Gabby can't do this.
So of course the book is just incredible. But one of the most powerful, to me, points in the book, I believe it was you and your mom later discussing the rape, and your mom makes the comment, I wouldn't have told me either. And so how did you guys reconcile that at that point, or was that reconciled? And before you answer, I saw this on Instagram, and it's kind of relates to everything. Where does your mother's unresolved pain reside on your body? I just thought that was very...
Ooh. That quote, let me tell you this quote she just said. Where does your mom's unresolved pain live in your body?
It wasn't live, it was rest.
Rest, reside. My mom and I had that talk And that's about, the most my mom can give me sometimes is acknowledgement that the reality I remember, I didn't make up, right? And I think that a lot of my mom's unresolved trauma lives right here for me. Oof. Because I know that in so many ways my mother was failed over and over and over and over, that she was let down, she was disappointed, she was embarrassed, she was treated poorly. And my mom had stomach issues like all my life. Like she just, everything going on in here all the time. She had something going on. That's even where, when her appendix burst, she didn't go to the hospital for 5 days after her appendix burst. Because that's how good my mom is at deciding not to feel her own pain. Mm-hmm. And I have the same power. I am so good at not feeling my pain if I choose not to. Unfortunately, you can't dampen one emotion without having to dampen all of them at the same time. So for years, my pain, I believe, lived in my belly. It wasn't until the middle of 2020 when I went away to a residential center to help with my mental and emotional health. When I left that place, I didn't have stomach aches. And it was the first time I didn't have stomach aches in as long as I could remember. And I don't have stomach aches now, except for when I'm at that place where I'm abandoning myself. Glennon Doyle talks about this a lot. She writes about this a lot. I know she's a blonde little white lady and people will be like, she don't know nothing about nothing, but she knows some stuff about some stuff. And this is one of those things she definitely knows about. Like, she's amazing. And she talks about, how these things live in the body, and also how we get them out, how we talk about them, how we share with one another. And I took Untamed with me to this residential center place, and I left with it. And one of the things I remember thinking when I was reading that book is, reading this book was a great way to figure out that I was abandoning myself for a really, really long time, turning off my feelings. And it wasn't working, because you are kind of all you have. You have community, you have wonderful people, usually friends, family, that's a wonderful thing, but who teaches them how to take care of you? You, because you know what you need. And I didn't know what the hell I needed, and I wasn't asking myself that question, but now I am. There's a lot less tummy aches.
The way you ended your book with your dad getting out, how is he doing today?
Yeah,
Things well with him?
she's asking about my dad,
Yeah.
and how he's doing today.
Mm-hmm.
He's great.
Good.
He's great. He lives in Fort Wayne. I saw him a few weeks ago. We went out for breakfast. That was the first time we went out, just the two of us. Mm-hmm. And then we went for a walk in the park. And, it was really, really great. It was actually like a fucking amazing day. I mean, it was such a good day hanging out with my dad and getting to know him. And he's doing well. 30 years in prison is nothing to sneeze at. He is still dealing with the mental and emotional effects of that. But, his life, for him, he came out of prison thinking he would have no one. that he would have nothing, that he would be going to like a halfway house and starting over on his own. And that's not what happened. He got out and he got to go live with his sister and
Your aunt, right?
yeah, my aunt, his sister, and his brothers helped him. My mom went out of her way to help him. My mom's boyfriend was driving my dad to job interviews. You know, like he came out and he had community, and I think that he's so grateful, you know, but you gotta get used to being safe.
Is he doing something now that he really likes?
He's painting,
That's
he
nice.
paints.
He's
It's like his
happy.
Well, Jeff, you want to wind it up? This has been fantastic. Let's give Ashley a round of applause.
I think we can all agree this would not have been the same on Zoom, all right? So occupying the space with these two amazing women has been really special tonight. I want to remind you, Ashley was kind enough to come to the bookstore. All of your books are signed already, so thank you for doing that. And of course, if you want to give some as gifts, we have additional ones back here as well. But what a special night. Thank you again to our friends at Penn America for helping make this happen as well. Couldn't have done it without that support. And thank you all for coming out, and hope to see you at some more in-person events in the very near future. Thank you again, Ashley. This is really good. Thank you very much.